thank God for the teaching authority of the magisterium. And it is a shame that I see my own brother priests and lay so-called Catholics attacking the very teaching authority of the Church of the Magisterium, who is enlightening us on what's happening in the world today, including surveillance, AI takeover, and Pope Leo in his first encyclical condemned it. Thanks be to God for the Magisterium. No other Christian religion is doing this as a universal teaching authority because they don't have this universal teaching authority. The Catholic Church does. So we are blessed beyond our merits to have a Roman pontiff upon which the entire church was built, as is testified in Matthew 16 when Jesus told Peter, upon this rock of the papacy I will build my church, and it will not go astray. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. So there are these heretics and schismatics in the church under the cloak of the Catholic title that are deceiving many people, saying, oh, I've obeyed the magisterium, I'm a Catholic, and then on the other side of their mouth they say, don't follow the Pope, don't follow the cardinals, don't follow this and that. Don't follow these false prophets. Remain loyal, obedient. That which Christ has guaranteed will not fail, which is the church based upon the rock of the papacy, over which the gates of hell will not have any power.
Thanks again for tuning in to Everything Catholic, and this video is going to be a little bit long and it's not going to be the usual compilation. But as always, I hope all of you are going to learn quite a lot from this one.
But let us examine for a moment what is peace. Everyone has their own version of peace. If you go through the proper Catholic catechism, issued by the Holy See in Latin and translated directly from Latin into English, let us go to 2302 of the green-covered Catholic Catechism, by recalling the commandment, you shall not kill. This is under Part 3, Section 2, that addresses the 10 commandments of peace and war, life and death. And it states, our Lord asked for peace of heart and denounced murderous anger and hatred as immoral. Anger is a desire for revenge. To desire vengeance in order to do evil to someone who should be punished is illicit, meaning against the law. But it is praiseworthy to impose restitution to correct vices and maintain justice. In other words, do good in expiation or reparation for the harm you did. If anger reaches the point of a deliberate desire to kill or seriously wound a neighbor, it is gravely against charity. That means it's a mortal sin. If anger reaches the point of deliberate desire to kill or seriously wound a neighbor, what does seriously wound mean, if not kill? You don't kill them physically, you kill them with gossip, the tongue. It is a mortal sin, the Catechism states. The Lord says everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment. Article 2303. Deliberate hatred is contrary to charity. Hatred of the neighbor is a sin when one deliberately wishes him evil. Hatred of the neighbor is a grave sin. Hatred of the neighbor is a grave sin when one deliberately desires him grave harm. Jesus says, but I say to you, love your enemies. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. Now, this rubs many Catholics roughly because they feel that they should not love an enemy. What does love an enemy mean? I will say what it doesn't mean, then I will say what it does mean. It does not mean allow them to walk over you like a doormat. God did not make any human being in his image and likeness to be a doormat, because God's not a doormat. So if he made you in his image and likeness, no one has their right to rub their boots on you. You are not a doormat. You have dignity, and you have a right to defend it. But the question is, how far do you go to defend it? And the answer is found in Scripture. You love your enemies who rub their boots on you. How can you love them and yet not sacrifice your dignity at the same time? This is how. Loving your enemies doesn't mean justifying their evil. thrust upon you or upon others you witness. It means praying for their conversion. That is what it means in this context. You pray that God intervene, open their eyes so that they may see their wrong and correct it. But you also have the option of exercising fraternal correction. So Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He doesn't say justify the wrong they do, because that's immoral. You have to correct wrongdoing, but with charity. Who says that? Saint Paul. He says, speak the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15. But the truth must be spoken. So you don't go up to the person and scream at the top of your lungs because they did something to harm you or a friend you know. You just apply the principle of Christ. Love them by correcting them fraternally if you can, if there's an occasion to do it, and if they're open to understand, and pray for them, their conversion. Catechism, Article 2304, respect for and develop of human life require peace. Think of that for a moment. To stop abortion, peace is absolutely essential. Respect for and development of human life require peace. Peace is not merely the absence of war, even though that's a sure sign of peace. It is not limited to maintaining a balance of powers between adversaries. Peace cannot be attained on earth without safeguarding the goods of persons. Free communication among men, which is now being sabotaged by surveillance systems, respect for the dignity of persons and peoples, and the assiduous practice of fraternity. Peace is the tranquility of order. Peace is the work of justice and the effect of charity. So now let us go back to the website of the Webster Merriam Dictionary. It states, peace is a state of tranquility or quiet, such as freedom from civil disturbance. Whereas the Church makes it very clear that freedom is not just the absence of war. Freedom is the tranquility of order. What order? The divine order. Remember the Blessed Virgin Mary? She speaks of the divine order in the book for the month of May. And if you want to know where that is found, all you have to do is go to day 13 in that book, and you will find the words of Mary as follows. My parents loved me in the divine order. She often uses this expression, divine order. She's referring to the love of God and love of neighbor in that order. God comes first. That's the order the Catechism is referring to here. So the Catechism emphasizes that peace is the tranquility of order, the divine order. Peace is the work of justice and the effect of charity. Catechism 2305. Those who renounce violence and bloodshed, and in order to safeguard human rights, make use of those means of defense available to the weakest, witness to evangelical charity, provided they do so without harming the rights and obligations of other men and societies. And societies. No one has a right to just barge into someone else's society and say, we're taking over because we want to. That's a sin. There has to be a justified reason of either self-defense or reappropriation. The Catechism 2306 adds, they bear legitimate witness to the gravity of the physical and moral risks of recourse to violence with all its destruction and death. 2307 talks about the fifth commandment that forbids the intentional destruction of human life. And this includes abortion and war, vengeance, evil, hatred. It states, because of the evils and injustices that accompany all war, the Church insistently urges everyone to prayer. and to action so that the divine goodness may free us from the ancient bondage of war. 2308. All citizens and all governments, all citizens and all governments are obliged to work for the avoidance of war. What a surprise. And it adds, however, as long as the danger of war persists and there is no international authority with the necessary competence and power, governments cannot be denied the right of lawful self-defense. Self-defense, not aggression. Once all peace efforts have failed. Once all peace efforts have failed. It's a last resort. Article 2309. The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. At one and the same time, the damage inflicted by the aggressor of the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. So if there is no aggressor of any nation to a country, they're not justified to start a war. This is the Catholic teaching in 2309. It adds, all other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical and ineffective. There must be serious prospects of success. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. These are the traditional elements enumerated in what is called the just war doctrine. The evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. So here the Church lays out very clearly in Article 2309 Catechism that the just war theory requires an aggressor, not a preventative strike. It does not justify that. There has to be an active aggressor, lasting, grave, and certain. 2310 of the Catechism adds, public authorities in this case have the right and duty to impose on citizens the obligations necessary for national defense. Those who are sworn to serve their country in the armed forces are servants of the security and freedom of nations. And freedom of nations. If they carry out their mortal duty honorably, they truly contribute to the common good of the nation and the maintenance of peace. Public authority should make equitable provision for those who, for reasons of conscience, refuse to bear arms. Let me repeat that, 2311. Public authorities should make equitable provision for those who, for reasons of conscience, refuse to bear arms. Sounds familiar with the jabs, where people were being denied their jobs, their visitations to dying people in hospitals because they wouldn't get a jab or wear a mask. Now we're finding that this COVID theater is coming apart by the seams. And yet, hundreds of thousands, millions worldwide bought it because they didn't do their research. And I'm not blaming them, because world governments now are so straining the citizens that both parents have to work and they don't have time to do their own research. I'm not saying the COVID, what do they call it, virus didn't exist. What I'm saying is a lot of false impositions were made, and we just found this out recently with the recent Congress and Senate hearing. They knew that 80% of expecting mothers would bear a dead child if they got jabbed, and still they impose this jab on pregnant mothers. This is a mortal sin. This is beyond a conscientious, rational, practical mind, if they have any concept of the common good and the dignity of human life. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at any names or peoples. Why? Because I can't read their conscience as God does. One of the things I've learned in my 40 years of religious life is this. There are many puppets out there that do the biddings of others, without all the information exposed to them. There's always a fall guy, and there's always those behind, what do you call it, the drapes of Oz, the screen, pulling the strings of these fall guys. Yes, many times the fall guys are responsible because for years they've allowed this injustice to continue and their conscience has become dead. That's right, the church talks about a dead conscience, where if you abuse the grace of God so much, you are no longer responsive to it. Sort of like the mole. You know, that little rodent that burrows itself in the ground without any eyes. It has eyes, but they can't see, they're blind. But at one point, it was able to see. And according to some scientists, because it chose the darkness for weeks on end over the light, it lost the propensity to see. It was as if God, standing in judgment, said to it, "Take the talent away," because it refused to use the grace I gave it. Same thing with a conscience. When you abuse it to the point of insensitivity, desensitization, it no longer acknowledges grace, and it is living in a state of perpetual grave sin. So we have a moral code in a divine order that begins with God, not with the state, not with a party majority, not with a nation. It begins with God, and it ends with God. So no one can take away the inalienable rights found in our American Bill of Rights, such as freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. No state can take these rights away, but you know what's happening now? With this surveillance system that is going completely out of control through databases and flock cameras. By the way, flock cameras are not just pointed at license plates anymore. They're now even being pointed at playgrounds, which is ridiculous. I don't understand that. Many people can understand that. And now they're moving to a digital ID, passport, currency, license, you name it. These freedoms that we enjoy in this great state of the Americas have to be safeguarded. Who safeguards them? The church. It's not just America, it's the whole world. Thank God for the teaching authority of the magisterium. And it is a shame that I see my own brother priests and lay so-called Catholics attacking the very teaching authority of the Church of the Magisterium, who is enlightening us on what's happening in the world today, including surveillance, AI takeover, and Pope Leo in his first encyclical condemned it. Thanks be to God for the Magisterium. No other Christian religion is doing this as a universal teaching authority because they don't have this universal teaching authority. The Catholic Church does. So we are blessed beyond our merits to have a Roman pontiff upon which the entire church was built, as is testified in Matthew 16 when Jesus told Peter, "Upon this rock of the papacy I will build my church, and it will not go astray. The gates of hell will not prevail against it." So there are these heretics and schismatics in the church under the cloak of the Catholic title that are deceiving many people, saying, "Oh, I've obeyed the magisterium, I'm a Catholic," and then on the other side of their mouth they say, "Don't follow the Pope, don't follow the cardinals, don't follow this and that." Don't follow these false prophets. Remain loyal, obedient to that which Christ has guaranteed will not fail, which is the church based upon the rock of the papacy, over which the gates of hell will not have any power. Article 2311, public authorities, as I mentioned, should make equitable provision for those who, for reasons of conscience, refuse to bear arms. They are nonetheless obliged to serve the human community in some other way. They should be given an option of serving the community in another way if they don't want to bear arms. Catechism, Article 2312. By the way, there's a lot of momentum now in a draft kicking into America very soon. There was an accord made with the military and the United States-Israel Defense Partnership Act of 2025 the 119th. I don't know all the details here, but people are starting to talk now about this because on August 5th, a proposal made its way through Congress that would integrate the U.S. and Israeli defense and intelligence apparatuses more tightly. Now, this has caused some people concern because, as you know, we are very much allied with Israel in this war in Iran. And people are raising eyebrows now why they made this, proposal. Anyway, I'm not a politician. I won't go there. Thanks be to God I'm not, because politics changes from one week to the next. And if I say one thing today, it'll probably be contradicting next week. Article 23:12, the church and human reason both assert the permanent validity of the moral law during armed conflict. The mere fact that war has regrettably broken out does not mean that everything becomes licit between the warring parties. You have to respect children, mothers, women. This has not been respected in Palestine. Article 23:13, non-combatants, wounded soldiers, and prisoners must be respected and treated humanely. Actions deliberately contrary to the law of nations and to its universal principles are crimes, as are the orders that command such actions. Blind obedience does not suffice to excuse those who carry them out. Let me repeat that. Blind obedience on the part of these soldiers, let's say involved in killing women and children, does not suffice to excuse them who carry these orders out. Thus, the extermination of people, nation, or ethnic minority must be condemned as a mortal sin. That means you go to hell if you don't confess it. One is morally bound to resist orders that command genocide. One is morally bound to resist orders that command genocide. Listen, I'm not saying this. This is the Catholic Church, Article 23:13. I'm the messenger. Article 23:14. Every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants is a crime against God and man, which merits firm and unequivocal condemnation. A danger of modern warfare is that it provides the opportunity to those who possess modern scientific weapons, especially atomic, biological, chemical weapons, to commit such crimes. Let us add direct energy weapons, which has now been released as a reality in America and in other countries. Article 23:15, the accumulation of arms strikes many as paradoxically suitable way of deterring potential adversaries from war. They see it as the most effective means of ensuring peace among nations. This method of deterrence gives rise to strong moral reservations. The arms race does not ensure peace. Far from eliminating the cause of war, it risks aggravating them. I wish to add my own opinion here. Having weapons of war does, in fact, to some extent, only God knows to which extent, deter nations from war. Case in point. Okay, I want to invade a nation that has the most atomic weapons in the world, knowing full well that if I attack them, they will eliminate me from the face of the earth. So that tells you that the storage of atomic weapons is in fact a deterrent to some extent. But in the end, the long run, does it really work? My personal opinion is no. The short run, it works. Yes, it's a short-term deterrent, but it does not work in the long run. Why? Because those with power become corrupted every time in every situation in human history. Eventually, in the long run, they all become corrupted. Article 23:16, the production of the sale of arms affect the common good of nations and of the international community. Hence, public authorities have the right and duty to regulate them. The short-term pursuit of private or collective interests cannot legitimate undertakings that provoke violence and conflict among nations and compromise the international juridical order. The last catechism article I wish to share, 23:17, injustice, excessive economic or social inequalities, envy, distrust, pride raging among men and nations constantly threaten peace and cause wars. Everything done to overcome these disorders contributes to building up peace and avoiding war. Okay.
And that will be all for the video this time. And just remember, if you have any suggestions or feedback, please share them with me in the comments below.